Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the QT Faculty of Law for today's conference on intellectual property and education in the age of COVID. As is always the case, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, and in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where QT now stands and recognise that these have always been places of teaching and learning, and we wish to pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within the QT community. And in the context of debates around intellectual property and education, there has been very significant discussion about the importance of Indigenous intellectual property. Today's event is going to look at some of the relationships and connections and intersections between intellectual property and education. It will cover many different species of intellectual property, spanning copyright law, trademark law, patent law, trade secrets, and questions of licensing. In many ways, the conference today is also going to span an array of different disciplines within education, everything from the creative industries to medicine and biotechnology and even clean technology. In addition, this event is also going to focus upon open licensing within the educational institutions. So the use of open licensing to promote open access, open innovation and open data is also a very kind of important dimension in terms of the debate and discussion over intellectual property and education. This event is also going to focus upon the role of universities and educational institutions and research organisations in responding to the coronavirus COVID-19 public health crisis. So universities and research institutions have a very particular special role to play as keystones in the knowledge infrastructure. They are generating a whole wide range of technologies that could be of use in tackling the coronavirus crisis, including vaccines, treatments and diagnostics, as well as a range of other public policy solutions. So this event, amongst other things, is going to think about ways and means in which we can encourage public transfer of some of those research and public policy solutions. Finally, this event is also going to be an Australian launch for this research handbook on intellectual property and technology transfer, edited by Professor Jacob Rooksbury from Gonzaga Law School. This collection provides a comparative analysis of how an array of different countries manage intellectual property and technology transfer from educational institutions, and also kind of includes a contribution by myself looking at intellectual property and higher education and 3D printing. So welcome everyone. I hope you enjoy today's range of presentations looking at different aspects of intellectual property and education. Thank you. So that concludes our first segment of today's conference on copyright law and education. The next part of our conference deals with trademark law and education, which is a kind of a growing topic as branding and marketing becomes ever more important for universities and educational institutions. We're delighted that Angela Dahlke is going to be talking about navigating private rights and the public good, trademark law and education. She, for a long while, was associated with the QT Foundry, but more recently has joined the ARC Centre of Excellence for Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers. She is registered as a patent and a trademark attorney, and given all her many different roles in universities, she seemed like the perfect person to talk about trademark law and education. Angela.
Thanks, Professor Rimmer. It's really great to be here speaking to you, a virtual audience, about trademark law and education. It's a really interesting subject and something I've had experience with from multiple perspectives. So I hope to share that trans-disciplinary, cross-sector experience and expertise with you today. It's a huge topic area, so I'll be touching on a few things, but there's certainly more to explore, and I think a ripe area for research too. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, where I am today and where you are, wherever you're watching, and pay my respects. Now, with trademark law and education, I have a confession. I am a trademark owner. I also own common law rights, which I haven't registered. I've been involved in trademark disputes, managing global portfolios, working as a patent and trademark attorney, helping innovators, entrepreneurs, researchers within university contexts, and also in side hustles have created brands to realise a public good. So I appreciate both the trademark, the private rights, but also the balancing those with the public good, and thinking about how trademarks can actually help with realising a public good. So when preparing for this talk, I reflected on my first experience of trademarks in the context of universities or education, because it was actually as an entrepreneur, well, I wasn't thinking that I was, but thinking about a problem, that of research funding, which is maybe a problem that is, still around, really. We're all experiencing that right now. But yes, how to fund research and students doing research. So from that was born an idea. It started with something simple, it grew into something much bigger than anticipated, and from that, a brand was born. Now, that experience taught me how meaningful trademarks or brands can be. You invest so much in growing it. For example, attracting corporate sponsors, sending out your first press release, having one of them bite, and news channel giving you primetime coverage, setting up your websites, your communications, doing a little bit, on the cheap because you're an entrepreneur, you're conserving your limited resources. And then you see something happen, and then you think about the trademark side as well. Well, there were certainly lessons there. The whole experience was one of learning. It was highs and lows, so it certainly can be an emotional thing to have a brand. And with the trademarks, we did register RAVE for Research and R for R. And it was one of those trademark applications actually that was opposed by a third party. Now, I counterattacked, and ultimately they offered to settle. Ultimately, the trademark was registered. We didn't settle. But that was a stressful time because legal proceedings aren't certain, and it's a lot of effort as well. So it made me really think about, was it worth it? When should you register trademarks? Is it always essential? So, fast forward a number of years. I didn't actually keep those registrations in the end because I moved on to working as a trademark patent attorney. But more recently, was involved in co-creating a brand and founding a social enterprise. Now, this experience has taught me just how important brands are from the perspective of really being able to convey something complex in a way that's meaningful and can resonate with people. So we created Bionauts to help discover and protect biodiversity. It's one of the most important planetary health issues. We're losing biodiversity. There's a mass extinction of life on planet Earth. So it's bringing together students and researchers, helping citizen scientists do a public good. We discover species where possible, and we sequence the DNA and share that. We publish that as a public good. Now, this brand, I reflect in, there's an uglier version of the trademark that I actually created, and the new one that I've updated, haven't actually registered the trademark as yet because, with entrepreneurship, you have limited resources and it's a matter of, strategically allocating those. So, of course, the first thing to think about is not infringing anyone else's rights when you adopt a brand. Ideally, you can also protect it to, enjoy the benefits and protect that reputation you're developing. In the meantime, things like domain names and using this TM symbol have so far been, so good. But, maybe there'll be an update on the trademark status. But moving on from that and introducing the topic today more fully. In the context of COVID and something significant that's happening, the US, I was struck by a news article that referred to Trump's company, which is run by his son, but he still has interest in it, actually filing an application for tele-rally. And, years before, the son who runs the company was saying, that absolutely, it's important to separate church and state. I quote, his wording. And I think from that, he meant private interests and serving the public. But when you look behind the scenes, actually, maybe the church's money and the trademark filings in respect of the Trump entities actually increased as he was, seeking to serve public office. So yes, that does ask questions about, private interests and trying to serve the public good. And also, in the context of this mark, tele-rally, for tele-rallies, can you even trademark that kind of thing? Should you be able to trademark that kind of thing? What happens when people try to trademark things that really should be part of the common heritage? When people with honest intention, want to describe what they're doing, for example. So stay tuned for that one. Now, in the context of universities obviously provide enormous public good, and we see that really brought to focus in the current context of COVID, where researchers across all disciplines I'm aware of have been really involved in helping us to respond to this great threat. But at the same time, universities need to fund themselves to survive, to be sustainable. And private rights increasingly can help them to do that. But how do you balance serving the public good and having private rights? How do you use them appropriately so you can still do good and not do harm? Well, I guess this invites a philosophical question, which, I'm no philosopher by credentials, so I won't answer this, but it is important for us all, I think, to think about the purpose of our universities. When you think about the word university, what do you think their purpose is? What kind of feelings arise? For me, they're custodians of knowledge, creators of knowledge. I think that's a great, noble thing, an important thing I would never want to lose. It's important, in my view, that we retain them and this great purpose. But certainly, the operational environment for universities has changed. And when you start to differentiate between different universities and what their purpose is, you'll see they're same, but different. You can think locally, a sandstone versus a more technical university, a public versus a private university, a university in Australia versus perhaps America. So they're not all the same. And also the pressures, the external forces are arguably, shifting, what they are and what they need to be to survive, unless we as a society change that context. So currently the context for COVID-19 is very difficult for universities amongst others. We're facing massive revenue shortfalls, huge loss of human capital, which can have long-term huge ramifications, huge loss of the value creation of this country, those opportunities. And what do we do? So universities, I mean, these are some examples of the different stakeholders that are key to universities and their funding. So it's increasingly diversified. But right now, for example, international students, that's left a massive hole. So these stakeholders are obviously important for universities as well to think about with marketing and branding and trademarks, because they do rely on these stakeholders for funding, and marketing, brands and trademarks can help them with that funding. So yes, maybe right now, instead of thinking about the purpose of universities, we're forced to think about the survival of universities, because we're seeing massive cuts and the future of some at risk. So who will survive? How do they adapt? What is the fittest in the context of all these forces? You know, going back many years, I mean, I don't remember the time when universities were free for students, when they were regarded as neophytes, where, you know, the academic would shape their learning according to their wisdom. Now, students are customers. And there's a global market, global competition. So Australian universities are not competing against each other, but global competitors. And, you know, with geopolitical forces as they are, things are getting tougher and global competition is increasing. Now, already we have seen, as a consequence of COVID-19, the loss of a brand that is beloved by its stakeholder community, and that is CEA, Creative Enterprise Australia, which is attached to QUT. Now, it has a great reputation when you look at what people say about it, what they write about it. So that is a sad thing, but obviously universities are having to do what they need to do to survive. Now, whilst CEA may disappear, it's built up brands that have considerable reputation and goodwill. It's also registered some of its trademarks. So trademarks, being personal property, can be assigned. So it's possible that something may yet continue from the work that they have done via, for example, an assignment of their trademark rights. Fashion 360, for example, to another entity which may be better positioned to take it forward. Now, I want to just give a historical perspective as well in relation to trademarks and think about how trademark activity has changed over the years. Now, I want to take you to the first trademark that was filed in Australia and is in the name of a university. Can you guess what it is, what it's for, what it would cover? So the answer to that is actually, it's a breathalyzer trademark. And it was invented by a US university professor, I think in his holidays, and it is no longer registered. It may have become genericized because that is how powerful it was. In terms of reputation, it's a double-edged sword. But anyway, upon his death, it was assigned to his university. So that is the first trademark in Australia in the name of a university, and it was for an innovation. The first trademark in Australia, which is filed by an Australian university, is the University of Sydney Shield. This is the oldest university in Australia, and its shield in use today is pretty similar, but it would, think about updating its trademarks to make sure that what is registered is also what is in use. Now, fast forward from this, we're seeing very different trademark activity, more sophisticated use of trademarks, branding, marketing. Marketing departments in universities are huge, and I think we'll see more and more evolution as universities see this as increasingly important if similar selection pressures apply. Now, in Australia, of course, we have thousands of trademarks that have been filed and or registered in the name of a university. And these come from different countries, Australian universities, others, and in the whole context of trademarks, Class 41 for education services is one of the top classes, and you can see the different countries which are key filers beyond Australia: US, China, UK, Germany. 2019 happened to be a bad year for trademarks, but we'll see what happens this year. Sometimes, economic conditions that are as tough as this can actually encourage people to, who've been retrenched or can't find a job, to create their own business. So that can actually stimulate some trademark activity. Now let's think about marketing, brands, and trademark rights. So within the university context, there are marketing departments because they need to be customer-centric or stakeholder-centric. It's about thinking about creating value so you can then extract value in the form of revenue, build good relationships of mutual benefit. Brands make marketing more efficient. They're a way of efficiently communicating and conveying brand image and so on. They use trademark signs to do this. Now, trademarks, the legal definition, include any sign that's capable of distinguishing goods or services of one trader from those of others. And it doesn't have to be in use, and intention to use can be sufficient. So why do universities do these things? Well, marketing is important to generate revenue, to build relationships. Branding has all these different values, including, that you're not a commodity, you're differentiating yourself, you're able to better compete, you're able to attract, it's an attractive force that can bring in custom. Trademarks, there are all these benefits that are associated with both common law and statutory trademarks. Now, the brands that are used by universities, as I said, are getting more complex. So in addition to, say, the corporate brand associated with the university, you then have products, innovations, initiatives, you have related companies, you have alliances, collectives, even certification marks. Even the country or location can be important. For example, Australia and all the great things about it for a student coming here. Or, if there's bad news in the news, then that can detract from the brand too. Now, in terms of building brands, how do you go about doing that? And what is their power? So we can see, for example, from research about Coca-Cola, that when you drink it out of the trademark, the packaging, you see the brand, it evokes all these positive associations that classical conditioning and other things have helped to implant in your mind, for that's where brands exist. So it actually changes your perception. So that's a very powerful thing. And it starts with creating brand knowledge. So recall and recognition, and then establishing the brand image. Now, that has great value. And here's a bit of an architecture for what marketers and brand managers seek to place the images around, or the associations around. So for example, things like, who does the university partner with? Who are the people that go to the universities? For example, successful graduates enjoying a wonderful career overseas, and so on. Now you can see that universities in Australia are starting to, differentiate further with their positionings, and these can even change over time. So you might, be able to recognise these different universities just from their slogans, which positions them slightly differently. Are you wanting to, be real world focused? Do something that's valued by industry, for example. Do you want to be a change maker? Do you want to be remarkable? So they're all good things, but they've positioned themselves slightly differently. And they all want to win the hearts and minds of their stakeholders. They all want to develop strong relationships with them, because that develops strong equity. And according to another model, so does IP and trading partners. So trademarks, along with other IP, can build valuable brands. And how valuable can brands be? Enormously valuable, so they shouldn't be overlooked as an important IP asset. Here's a way for evaluating it according to this particular survey. So when we look at university brand associations, we're seeing some important brand alliances that have beneficial spillover effects. For example, MIT, USA, which has always been about head and hands, similar to real world, joining forces with QT for those benefits. We're seeing some associations that universities would hope to extract themselves from because after the fact, negative things have come about. So yes, you've got to be careful about your associations. We're seeing associations with students within universities and their branding being celebrated by universities. For example, student innovators, entrepreneurs who've created brands. Now with trademarks, again, it's about the balance. So balancing, the private and the public. So for private benefits and rights, these are extensive, and I'll leave you to have a look at those, but certainly registration can afford enormous benefits, including protection in advance of use, helping you with overseas protection, helping you protect your domain names against bad faith use, and many more things. There are also assets that can accumulate value. We're seeing universities engage in use of certification marks, which I think also can afford a public good. So here's an example of one, the FODMAP, which many of you might be aware of. So this can create revenue because certification can be a service, and this service is born of research. And you'll see a website promoting this brand and product that has been certified with it. And also collective marks. This is new territory. There's only one on the trademarks register for a collective mark. It's been examined. There's not much more you can see about it, but one might hypothesize what it has to do with. Yes, so balancing the private rights and public interest. There are lessons to be learned, and many of those come from the USA, where aggressive enforcement has been objected to, where collegiate sports is massive. I mean, those sports attract significant interest, massive TV viewerships, massive revenue from advertising dollars, and that gets fed back into universities. And then there are companies, external companies to universities, which are often engaged to manage those trademarks, and they can be overly aggressive in their enforcement. So that's perhaps a cautionary tale for Australia. We don't quite have the same sporting focus as the United States, although that might change, including with things like esports. But yes, this is when it can run into trouble with how public perceives universities, their power, and stepping away from their primary purpose. So there's much more to say on this topic, but thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that snippet. There's much more to explore and research. Thank you for your time.